If you can open this safe, I'll marry you.
Vivian Whitmore declared with the cruel smile that had made her infamous among Manhattan's financial elite, gesturing toward the antique steel vault that had dominated her corner office for 15 years without ever being opened. The executives gathered around Vivian's mahogany desk erupted in laughter that carried the edge of expensive whiskey and corporate arrogance. It was past midnight at Whitmore Financial's annual holiday party, and the city's most ruthless CEO was entertaining her inner circle with what she considered harmless sport, humiliating people who couldn't fight back. Tyrone Jackson paused in his methodical cleaning of the conference room adjacent to Vivian's office, his trained ear catching the conversation through the partially open door. At 42, Tyrone had perfected the art of invisibility that came with 7 years of night custodial work, but something about Vivian's mocking tone made him look up from the trash can he was emptying. "Come on, Vivian," laughed Bradley Morrison, the VP of investment banking, whose trust fund had bought him a Harvard MBA and a corner office he'd never earned through competence. "That thing hasn't been opened since your father died. Even professional locksmiths couldn't crack it." "Which is exactly why it's the perfect challenge," Vivian replied, her voice carrying the satisfied cruelty of someone who enjoyed watching others fail at impossible tasks. "Bring in some of the cleaning staff. Let them embarrass themselves trying to open a safe that's defeated actual experts." The suggestion was delivered as entertainment, a way to humiliate service workers for the amusement of executives who measured their worth by other people's failures. Several other VPs nodded with approval, already anticipating the spectacle of watching janitors struggle with a challenge designed to demonstrate their intellectual limitations. Tyrone felt his jaw tighten with familiar anger. He'd been listening to variations of this conversation for 7 years. Wealthy people treating working-class employees as objects for their entertainment, never imagining that competence might exist in unexpected places. "Ms. Rodriguez," Vivian called to the night cleaning supervisor, "bring me whoever's available from your crew. I want to make this interesting." Maria Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, her expression showing the careful neutrality she'd developed during 20 years of managing custodial staff for financial firms. "Ms. Whitmore, my people are here to clean offices, not provide entertainment." "Maria, darling," Vivian said with the condescending tone she used when addressing anyone she considered beneath her social status, "I'm offering your employees a chance to win something extraordinary. Surely one of them would be interested in trying to open a safe that stumped professional experts?" Tyrone set down his cleaning supplies and stepped into Vivian's office with the quiet confidence he'd learned during 8 years of military service in specialized security operations. The room fell silent as executives processed the unexpected appearance of a janitor who moved with authority rather than deference. "I'll try," Tyrone said simply, his voice carrying none of the subservience that Vivian expected from service workers. Vivian's expression shifted from amusement to curiosity as she studied Tyrone's face. She'd seen him cleaning her building for years, but had never bothered learning his name or acknowledging his existence beyond occasionally complaining about missed spots or scheduling conflicts. "Excellent," Vivian said, her smile widening with anticipation of watching this custodian fail spectacularly. "What's your name?" "Tyrone Jackson, ma'am." "Well, Tyrone Jackson, let me explain the rules. This safe belonged to my father, Theodore Whitmore, who founded this company. He died 15 years ago, without giving anyone the combination. Professional locksmiths, safe crackers, even FBI security experts have tried to open it without success." Vivian gestured toward the imposing steel vault with the theatrical flair of someone accustomed to being the center of attention. "If you can open it, I'll honor my promise. Marriage, a cash prize, whatever you prefer. But when you fail, and you will fail, you'll have provided us with some excellent entertainment." Tyrone approached the safe with the methodical assessment he'd brought to hundreds of security challenges during his military service. The vault was a 1950s Mosler double-guard model designed with redundant locking mechanisms that would defeat conventional lock-picking attempts. But Tyrone's training had included advanced techniques for bypassing security systems under combat conditions, methods that civilian experts wouldn't typically employ. "Tyrone," Maria whispered urgently, "you don't have to do this. Ms. Whitmore is just amusing herself at your expense." "It's okay, Ms. Rodriguez," Tyrone replied, running his fingers along the safe's steel surface with the tactile sensitivity he'd developed during specialized military training. "I know what I'm doing." The executives gathered closer, their expressions mixing skepticism with anticipation. None of them imagined that a night janitor might possess skills that had eluded professional safe specialists, but they were curious to see how long Tyrone would struggle before admitting defeat. For 20 minutes, Tyrone worked in focused silence, using techniques that combined mechanical precision with acoustic analysis. He listened to the subtle sounds of tumblers, felt for microscopic variations in resistance, and applied pressure in sequences that reflected advanced knowledge of lock engineering rather than random trial and error. "This is ridiculous," Bradley muttered after watching Tyrone's methodical approach. "He's just pretending to know what he's doing to prolong his moment of attention." But Angela Foster, the CFO, who had always treated custodial staff with basic human respect, noticed something the other executives missed. "Look at his technique. Those aren't random movements. He actually understands how the mechanism works." Tyrone had identified the safe's vulnerability, a manufacturing flaw common in 1950s Mosler models that could be exploited through precise manipulation of the dial sequence combined with strategic pressure on the handle. It was knowledge that came from military training most civilians never received, techniques developed for accessing secured facilities during combat operations. At 12:47 a.m., the safe's heavy door swung open with a metallic thud that silenced every conversation in the room. The executives stared in shock as Tyrone stepped back from the open vault, his expression calm despite having just accomplished what professional experts had declared impossible. Inside the safe, manila folders and document boxes waited in organized rows, preserved exactly as Theodore Whitmore had left them 15 years earlier. "Jesus Christ," whispered Bradley, his voice carrying disbelief rather than admiration. "He actually did it." Vivian stood frozen behind her desk, processing that her cruel entertainment had just backfired in spectacular fashion. The janitor she'd intended to humiliate had succeeded where trained professionals had failed, leaving her bound by a promise she'd never imagined needing to honor. "How?" Vivian asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Military training," Tyrone replied simply, not elaborating on the specialized security operations that had taught him advanced lock manipulation techniques. "Ma'am, I should mention, I'm not interested in marriage or prizes. I was just demonstrating that your assumptions about people's capabilities might be incomplete." But as Tyrone began to close the safe door, something caught his attention. The top folder in the stack was labeled "Vivian, Personal and Confidential" in Theodore Whitmore's distinctive handwriting. Behind it, adoption papers were partially visible, along with photographs and legal documents that suggested secrets Theodore had kept even from his daughter. "Whitmore," Tyrone said carefully, "there are documents in here with your name on them. Your father may have left information he intended for you to find." Vivian's face went pale as she processed the implications. The safe she'd used as a prop for humiliating others had been preserving secrets about her own life, information her father had secured behind locks that required specialized expertise to bypass. "What kind of information?" Vivian asked, her earlier arrogance replaced by vulnerability that surprised everyone in the room. Tyrone hesitated, recognizing that whatever the documents contained would change Vivian's life in ways that might be painful. "Ma'am, these look like personal family records. Maybe something you should review privately." But Angela Foster had moved closer, and caught sight of the adoption paperwork through the safe door. Vivian, those look like legal documents. Adoption records, maybe birth certificates. The room fell silent as the implications settled. Vivian Whitmore, the woman who had built her identity around inherited wealth and family legacy, was looking at evidence that her relationship to the Whitmore family might be more complicated than she'd ever known. "Everyone out," Vivian said suddenly, her voice sharp with panic. "Bradley, Angela, all of you, leave, now." As the executives filed out of the office, Tyrone remained behind, uncertain whether his responsibility ended with opening the safe or extended to helping Vivian process whatever revelations the documents contained. "Ms. Whitmore, would you like me to leave as well?" Vivian looked at Tyrone, really looked at him for the first time in 7 years, seeing not the invisible janitor she'd dismissed, but the competent man who had just shattered her assumptions about intelligence, capability, and her own family history. "No," Vivian said quietly, her hands shaking as she reached toward the folder marked with her name. I think I might need help understanding what my father kept hidden from me." As Tyrone watched Vivian open the folder with trembling fingers, he realized that his moment of technical competence had created consequences neither of them had anticipated. Some challenges, once solved, revealed problems far more complex than locked doors and mechanical puzzles. The documents that spilled across Vivian's desk would force both of them to confront truths about identity, family, and the dangerous assumptions people made about each other based on job titles and social status. The adoption papers lay spread across Vivian's mahogany desk like evidence in a trial that would determine everything she thought she knew about herself. At 35, Vivian Whitmore had built her entire identity around being Theodore Whitmore's biological daughter, heir to a financial empire that had been in the family for generations. Now she stared at documents proving she'd been adopted at age 3 from a foster care system she'd spent her adult life looking down on. "This has to be fake," Vivian whispered, her voice carrying the desperation of someone watching their foundational beliefs collapse in real time. "My father would have told me. We talked about family legacy constantly. He built this company for me to inherit." Tyrone stood awkwardly near the safe, uncertain whether he should offer comfort to a woman who had treated him as invisible furniture for 7 years, or whether his role had ended when the steel door swung open. The documents were clearly authentic, official state letterhead, notarized signatures, legal language that couldn't be forged or misinterpreted. "Ma'am, I'm sorry you're learning this information this way," Tyrone said carefully. "Maybe your father had reasons for keeping the adoption private. That doesn't change the fact that he raised you, loved you, and built this company with you as his heir." Vivian's laugh was sharp with hysteria. "Do you understand what this means? Every board meeting where I've asserted my authority based on family legacy, every business decision I've justified through inherited expertise, every time I've claimed that leadership was in my blood, it was all based on a lie. The revelation was destroying more than Vivian's self-concept. It was threatening the foundation of respect she'd demanded from employees, investors, and competitors who had deferred to her partly because of her presumed genetic connection to Theodore Whitmore's business acumen. Ms. Whitmore, respectfully, your adoption doesn't invalidate your accomplishments or your qualifications to run this company." "Doesn't it?" Vivian shot back, her composure cracking completely. "For 15 years, I've led board meetings by referencing my father's vision, my inherited understanding of his business philosophy. I've treated employees like you as intellectually inferior because I believed I had genetic advantages you lacked." The admission was painful and honest. Vivian was confronting not just the shock of discovering her adoption, but the recognition that her arrogance had been based on false assumptions about inherited superiority. Tyrone thought about his 9-year-old son, Jaden, asleep in their queen's apartment, trusting that his father would come home from another night of cleaning offices and helping with homework. For 7 years, Tyrone had accepted Vivian's dismissive treatment because he needed steady employment that accommodated his limitations. The limitations came from his military service in Afghanistan, where an IED explosion had damaged his left leg and ended his career as a security specialist. The army had medically discharged him with full benefits, but no civilian job prospects that matched his specialized training. Custodial work provided steady income and health insurance that covered Jaden's needs, but it also meant accepting invisibility from people like Vivian, who measured human worth through professional achievement. "Ma'am, can I ask you something directly?" Vivian looked up from the adoption papers, her eyes red with unshed tears. "What? Why did you make that bet tonight about marrying whoever could open the safe?" The question forced Vivian to examine the cruelty that had characterized her interaction with employees for years. "I don't know. Entertainment, I suppose. The executives expect me to be commanding, entertaining, someone who demonstrates power through making others feel small. And how does that feel now?" Vivian was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications of Tyrone's question. "Horrible. Like I've been performing a version of myself that was based on lies I didn't even know I was telling." The conversation was interrupted by Tyrone's phone, buzzing with a text from Jaden. "Dad, I can't sleep. Will you help me with my math homework when you get home? I'm working ahead on fractions." The message reminded Tyrone of what mattered most: his son's education, their stable home life, and the careful routine that had allowed them both to thrive despite the limitations imposed by his military injuries and employment circumstances. "Ms. Whitmore, I need to finish my cleaning rounds and get home to my son. But if you need someone to talk through what you've discovered, I'm willing to listen. Sometimes it helps to process difficult information with someone who doesn't have expectations about how you should react." Vivian studied Tyrone's face, recognizing something she'd never bothered to notice during 7 years of treating him as invisible. Genuine compassion offered without expecting anything in return. "Tyrone, can I ask you something? How do you do it?" "Do what?" "Maintain dignity while people like me treat you as less intelligent, less valuable, less worthy of basic respect?" The question was more honest than anything Vivian had ever asked him, and it deserved an equally honest answer. "Miss Whitmore, for 8 years, I served in Army security operations that required skills most people don't possess. I lost that career due to combat injuries that had nothing to do with my competence or intelligence. For the past 7 years, I've worked custodial jobs, not because I lack abilities, but because I have a son who needs stability more than I need professional recognition." Tyrone paused, considering how much personal information he was comfortable sharing with someone who had just discovered that her entire identity was built on false assumptions. "Every night when I come home, Jaden asks me about my work, about the people I meet, about whether I'm proud of what I do. I tell him that work is valuable when it serves your family and your community, regardless of whether other people understand its importance. But doesn't it bother you when people assume you're less capable because of your job title? It bothers me when those assumptions prevent me from helping people or contributing solutions to problems I could solve. Tonight, for example, I've spent 7 years watching you struggle with leadership challenges that my military training could have helped address, but you never asked for my input because you assume custodial workers couldn't contribute valuable insights." The observation stung because it was accurate. Vivian had indeed struggled with security protocols, employee loyalty, and organizational efficiency, problems that someone with Tyrone's background might have helped solve if she'd been willing to recognize his expertise. "What kind of leadership challenges?" Tyrone hesitated, unsure whether offering business advice to his boss's boss was appropriate or wise. But Vivian's question seemed genuine rather than rhetorical. Security vulnerabilities mostly. Employee retention problems that stem from people feeling undervalued. Communication breakdowns between different levels of staff that create inefficiencies and resentment. You've noticed all that from cleaning offices at night. I've noticed it because people talk freely around custodial staff. They assume we're not listening or don't understand business operations. But I hear conversations about budget concerns, staffing problems, client relationships, and strategic challenges. I just never had a reason to share those observations. Vivian realized that Tyrone had been functioning as an inadvertent intelligence gatherer for 7 years, present for sensitive conversations, but dismissed as irrelevant by executives who never considered that service workers might have valuable perspectives. Tyrone, why are you telling me this now? Why help someone who's treated you dismissively for years? Because everyone deserves support when they're learning difficult truths about themselves. And because my son is watching how I treat people who are struggling, even people who haven't been kind to me. The reference to Jaden reminded Vivian that Tyrone's choices were influenced by parenting responsibilities she'd never had to consider. Her leadership style had been shaped by corporate expectations rather than family obligations, competitive achievement rather than moral instruction for the next generation. Tell me about your son. For the next hour, Tyrone shared stories about Jaden's academic achievements, his curiosity about his father's military service, and his questions about why smart, capable adults sometimes worked jobs that didn't match their education or abilities. The conversation revealed Tyrone as a thoughtful parent who used his own experiences to teach his son about resilience, dignity, and finding purpose in circumstances beyond your control. Jaden sounds remarkable, Vivian said, meaning it. He is. He's also the reason I need to be careful about taking risks that might jeopardize our stability, which is why I need to ask you something directly. What? What happens tomorrow morning when you've had time to process tonight's revelations? Do I still have a job here, or does learning about my background change how you view my employment? The question forced Vivian to confront practical implications of their conversation. Tyrone had demonstrated capabilities that exceeded his current position, but utilizing those capabilities would require acknowledging that she'd misjudged his potential for years. Tyrone, what would you want to happen? I want to continue providing for my son without creating instability in his life. But I also want to contribute more meaningfully to work that matters. Tonight showed me that I miss using skills I developed during my military service. Vivian looked at the adoption papers still spread across her desk, then at Tyrone, recognizing that both of them were confronting questions about identity, capability, and the assumptions other people made about their worth. What if we both took time to figure out who we actually are, when we're not performing roles other people expect us to play? The suggestion was both practical and vulnerable, an admission that Vivian's arrogant CEO persona might be as constructed and limiting as the invisibility Tyrone had accepted in custodial work. Ms. Whitmore, I'm willing to help you process what you've learned tonight, but I need to know that doing so won't cost me the job security my son depends on. Tyrone, you have my word that your employment is secure regardless of what happens next, but I'm hoping that what happens next is both of us discovering we're more capable and valuable than the roles we've been playing. As Tyrone gathered his cleaning supplies and prepared to finish his shift, he realized that opening Vivian's safe had created obligations neither of them had anticipated. Some discoveries, he understood, required ongoing courage to fully explore their implications. 3 days after discovering her adoption, Vivian sat in her office at 6 a.m., staring at additional documents Tyrone had helped her organize from the safe. Birth certificates, medical records, and a sealed letter marked for Vivian's 18th birthday that Theodore had apparently never worked up the courage to deliver. The letter, written in her adoptive father's careful handwriting, explained that her biological parents had died in a car accident, and that he'd chosen to hide the adoption to protect her from grief he couldn't bear to share. "Dad," Vivian whispered to the empty office, "why didn't you trust me with the truth?" Tyrone knocked gently on her open door, arriving earlier than his usual shift because Vivian had asked for help interpreting some of the legal documents. Over the past 3 days, their relationship had shifted from employer-employee to something more complex. Two people helping each other navigate identity crises that required honest conversation rather than professional hierarchy. "Ms. Whitmore, I brought coffee," Tyrone said, setting a cup on her desk with the careful consideration he showed for all people who were struggling. "How are you handling the letter from your father?" "I don't know whether to be angry or grateful," Vivian admitted, gesturing for Tyrone to sit in the chair across from her desk, a courtesy she'd never extended to custodial staff in 15 years of management. "He protected me from painful information, but he also built my entire identity around false assumptions about inherited capability." Tyrone settled into the chair, conscious that their evolving relationship was creating complications for both of them. His physical limitations had been aggravated by the additional emotional stress of supporting Vivian through her crisis while maintaining his regular custodial duties. His left leg, damaged by the IED explosion, was causing increasing pain as he worked longer hours without adequate rest. "Maybe he planned to tell you when you were older, more established in your own right," Tyrone suggested. "Parents sometimes make decisions based on protecting their children rather than preparing them for difficult truths." The observation came from Tyrone's own experience, raising Jaden as a single father, constantly weighing how much information to share about his military service, his injuries, and the career limitations that had led to their current circumstances. "Tyrone, can I ask about your son's mother? You've never mentioned her." The question touched territory Tyrone rarely discussed, but Vivian's honesty about her own family complications made him willing to reciprocate. "Sarah died in a car accident when Jaden was 2. She was a nurse, working double shifts to support us while I was transitioning out of military service. I was dealing with PTSD and physical therapy, not contributing much to our household or our relationship." Tyrone's voice carried the weight of guilt he'd never fully resolved. "The night she died, she was driving home from a 16-hour shift at the hospital because I wasn't able to work consistently enough to cover our expenses. I've always wondered whether my limitations contributed to the stress that put her on the road that night." Vivian felt tears she didn't expect, recognizing that Tyrone carried responsibility for his family's well-being in ways she'd never had to consider. Her wealth and position had insulated her from the kind of practical decisions that shaped other people's daily lives. "Tyrone, that wasn't your fault. Maybe not directly, but it taught me that my choices affect people who depend on me, and that I need to be very careful about taking risks that could jeopardize Jaden's stability." The conversation was interrupted by Jaden himself, who appeared in Vivian's office doorway with his school backpack and an expression of curious concern. "Dad, you forgot your lunch, and you didn't answer my text about math homework," Jaden said, studying the woman behind the large desk with the analytical attention he'd inherited from his father. Vivian looked at Tyrone's son, this polite, observant 9-year-old who moved with quiet confidence despite circumstances that might have made other children insecure. Jaden was smaller than average for his age, but carried himself with dignity that reminded Vivian of his father's bearing. "Jaden, this is Ms. Whitmore," Tyrone said, standing to accept the lunch his son had brought. "She's been helping me with a special project." "Nice to meet you, Ms. Whitmore," Jaden said with the formal politeness Tyrone had taught him for interacting with adults. "Dad, are you okay? You've been working extra hours this week, and your leg was hurting when you got home yesterday." The observation revealed how closely Jaden monitored his father's well-being, a responsibility no 9-year-old should carry, but that single-parent households often required from children who understood their family's vulnerabilities. "I'm fine, buddy. Just helping Ms. Whitmore with some research that requires extra time." Jaden's expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced, but he'd learned not to push his father about work-related stress that might be beyond their control. "Ms. Whitmore, are you the boss of this building?" Jaden asked with 9-year-old directness. "Yes, I am. Then could you maybe give my dad some projects that don't make his leg hurt worse? He's really smart about security and organization, but carrying heavy cleaning equipment is hard for him sometimes." The request was delivered without self-consciousness, a child advocating for his father's well-being, with the assumption that reasonable adults would accommodate physical limitations if they understood the situation. Vivian felt something crack in her chest. Not grief this time, but recognition of how thoroughly she'd failed to see the people whose work made her comfort possible. Jaden's matter-of-fact concern for his father revealed layers of Tyrone's situation she'd never bothered to consider. "Jaden, that's a very reasonable request. I think your father has skills that would be better utilized in different kinds of work." After Jaden left for school, Vivian and Tyrone sat in contemplative silence, both processing how the child's presence had highlighted the personal costs of their evolving relationship. "He's remarkable," Vivian said finally. "He's had to grow up faster than I wanted," Tyrone replied. "Single-parent households require children to be more aware of adult concerns than is probably healthy for them." "What kind of work would you want to do if physical limitations weren't a factor?" The question forced Tyrone to articulate dreams he'd suppressed for 7 years. Security consulting, maybe organizational efficiency analysis. "I have training in risk assessment and personnel management that could be valuable in corporate environments." "What's prevented you from pursuing those opportunities?" "Partially the physical limitations, partially the gap in my employment history, partially the assumption that custodial work indicates limited capabilities rather than circumstantial necessity." Vivian recognized that Tyrone's career limitations reflected exactly the kind of prejudicial assumptions she'd been making about service workers for years. "Tyrone, what if I offered you a position that utilized your security expertise without requiring physical demands that aggravate your injuries? What kind of position?" "Security assessment and employee relations consulting. We've had ongoing problems with workplace efficiency, staff retention, and communication between management and support personnel. Your observations about organizational dynamics could be valuable." The offer was generous and professionally appropriate, but Tyrone felt anxiety about accepting opportunities that might prove too challenging or unstable for someone with his medical limitations. "Ms. Whitmore, I appreciate the consideration, but I need to be careful about taking on responsibilities I might not be able to handle consistently. What would make the position feel manageable for you?" Tyrone considered the question seriously. "Flexible scheduling that accommodates medical appointments and pain management, the ability to work from home when physical symptoms are problematic, and assurance that struggling with health issues wouldn't jeopardize my employment. All of that seems reasonable. But Tyrone, there's something else I want to discuss with you." Vivian's tone carried weight that made Tyrone immediately alert to potential complications. "Over the past 3 days, helping me process my adoption documents has required you to work additional hours that have clearly affected your health. I can see that you're in more physical pain, and Jaden has noticed changes in your routine that worry him." The observation was accurate and concerning. Tyrone had indeed been pushing himself beyond his physical limitations, partly from professional obligation and partly from genuine concern for Vivian's emotional well-being. "I'm managing okay. You're not managing okay, and pretending that you are serves neither of us well. If we're going to work together on a more substantial basis, we need to establish boundaries that protect your health and your relationship with Jayden. The conversation continued for 2 hours, with Vivian and Tyrone developing a framework for professional collaboration that accommodated his physical limitations while utilizing his expertise. But as they planned the transition from custodial work to security consulting, both understood that their relationship had moved beyond simple employment into territory that felt personal and complicated. Tyrone, there's one more thing. The board meets next week to discuss quarterly performance and personnel changes. Some of the executives who witnessed you opening the safe have been asking questions about your background and qualifications. What kind of questions? The kind that suggests they're either interested in utilizing your skills or concerned about how your competence reflects on their assumptions about staff capabilities. Tyrone felt the familiar anxiety that came with unwanted attention from powerful people who might view his abilities as threatening rather than valuable. Ms. Whitmore, I don't want to create complications for either of us. If promoting me causes problems with your executive team, maybe we should keep the current arrangement. Tyrone, the complications already exist. We can either address them directly by demonstrating that recognizing talent serves the company's interests, or we can continue pretending that valuable skills don't exist when they don't match conventional expectations. As Tyrone prepared to begin his regular custodial duties, both he and Vivian understood that their personal transformations were creating professional obligations that would test whether their individual growth could survive institutional resistance to change. Some discoveries they were learning required not just personal courage, but the willingness to challenge systems that benefited from keeping valuable people invisible. 2 weeks after Tyrone's promotion to security and personnel consultant, Vivian stood before Whitmore Financial's board of directors, facing the most hostile audience of her 15-year tenure as CEO. The mahogany conference table was surrounded by men and women who had built their wealth through traditional hierarchies and were deeply suspicious of any changes that challenged established power structures. Vivian, began Richard Pemberton, the board chairman whose family had invested in Whitmore Financial since its founding, we need to discuss your recent personnel decisions, specifically your choice to promote a custodial worker to a senior consulting position without board approval. The criticism was delivered with the polite viciousness that characterized boardroom politics, designed to challenge Vivian's leadership while maintaining plausible deniability about personal attacks. Richard, Tyrone Jackson's promotion was based on demonstrated expertise and organizational need, Vivian replied, her voice carrying new confidence that came from understanding her own capabilities rather than defending inherited authority. His background in military security operations directly addresses several operational challenges we've been struggling to resolve. His background, interrupted Helena Morrison, the board member whose investment banking connections had made her wealthy enough to purchase influence, includes medical discharge from military service and 7 years of employment in menial positions. What qualifies him for strategic consulting in a financial services environment? The question revealed exactly the kind of prejudicial thinking that had prevented Tyrone's talents from being recognized for years, but Vivian was prepared with documentation of his contributions during the 2 weeks since his promotion. Helena, in 14 days, Tyrone has identified security vulnerabilities that external consultants missed, developed protocols for improving employee retention that have already reduced turnover in support departments, and created communication systems that have increased operational efficiency by 12%. Vivian distributed reports that detailed Tyrone's work, including cost-benefit analyses that demonstrated measurable improvements to company performance. More importantly, Vivian continued. His insights have come from understanding our organizational dynamics in ways that external consultants never could, because he's observed our operations from perspectives that management typically ignores. The board members reviewed Tyrone's reports with expressions ranging from skeptical to genuinely impressed. His analysis of workplace communication patterns was sophisticated and thorough, identifying problems and proposing solutions that reflected deep understanding of both human psychology and operational efficiency. "This is certainly comprehensive work," admitted Margaret Chen, the CFO, whose financial background had made her initially skeptical of Tyrone's qualifications. But the question remains whether promoting custodial staff to consulting positions sets precedents that could destabilize our organizational structure. Before Vivian could respond, the conference room door opened to admit Tyrone himself, accompanied by Angela Foster and 3 other mid-level executives who had requested to participate in the board discussion. "Ms. Whitmore," Tyrone said, his voice carrying the respectful authority he'd learned in military briefings, "you asked me to present the security assessment findings directly to the board. I hope that's still appropriate." "Of course, Tyrone. Please proceed with your presentation." For the next 45 minutes, Tyrone walked the board through a comprehensive analysis of Whitmore Financial's operational vulnerabilities, employee satisfaction metrics, and competitive positioning relative to similar firms. His presentation was professionally prepared and delivered with competence that forced even skeptical board members to acknowledge his expertise. "Mr. Jackson," Richard said after Tyrone concluded his presentation, "this analysis suggests problems that our previous consulting firms failed to identify. How did you develop insights that eluded expensive external experts?" "Mr. Pemberton, external consultants typically interview management and review official documentation, but they rarely observe daily operational realities or communicate directly with support staff who understand systemic problems from ground-level perspectives." And the Tyrone advanced to his next slide, which detailed employee feedback that had never been formally collected or analyzed. "For 7 years, I've been present for conversations that revealed frustration, inefficiency, and communication breakdowns that cost the company both productivity and employee retention. The difference isn't superior expertise, it's access to information that hierarchical structures typically prevent from reaching decision-makers." The explanation was diplomatic but pointed, suggesting that organizational problems stemmed partly from leadership's isolation from operational realities rather than inherent complexity that required expensive external intervention. "Mr. Jackson," Helena asked, "what makes you confident that your recommendations would be more effective than approaches suggested by established consulting firms?" "Ms. Morrison, I'm not confident that my recommendations are superior. I'm confident that they're based on more comprehensive information about actual working conditions and employee perspectives than external consultants typically gather." Tyrone's humility was strategic and genuine, acknowledging limitations while demonstrating the value of his unique vantage point. "Additionally," Tyrone continued, "my military background taught me to assess organizational efficiency under stress conditions that reveal vulnerabilities invisible during routine operations. Financial services firms face regulatory pressures and market volatility that require resilience testing similar to military preparedness evaluation. The connection between military strategic thinking and corporate risk management was compelling to board members who understood that competitive business environments required systematic approaches to identifying and addressing operational weaknesses." "Mr. Jackson," Margaret said, "assuming your recommendations prove effective, what additional resources would you need to implement suggested improvements?" "Ms. Chen, Most of the improvements require organizational changes rather than additional expenditures, better communication protocols, modified training procedures, and recognition systems that utilize existing personnel more effectively. After Tyrone left to allow the board private discussion, Vivian faced questions that revealed how thoroughly her leadership style had been transformed by her personal revelations and her working relationship with Tyrone. "Vivian," Richard said, "your approach to personnel management has changed significantly since your father's death. This promotion of custodial staff to consulting positions represents a departure from traditional practices that concern some board members." "Richard, my approach has changed because I've learned that traditional practices often waste valuable human resources by making assumptions about capability based on current employment rather than actual competence." Vivian's response was confident but not defensive, reflecting growth that came from confronting her own prejudicial assumptions rather than simply reacting to external criticism. "More fundamentally," Vivian continued, "I've learned that effective leadership requires recognizing talent wherever it exists, not just where we expect to find it. Tyrone's contributions over the past 2 weeks have already improved our operational efficiency in measurable ways." The board discussion continued for another hour, with members debating whether Vivian's personnel decisions represented innovative leadership or dangerous departure from proven business practices. But the financial data was compelling. Employee satisfaction had improved, operational costs had decreased, and client satisfaction metrics had increased since Tyrone's promotion. "Vivian," Margaret said finally, "the board is willing to support your personnel decisions on a trial basis, with quarterly performance reviews to ensure that unconventional approaches actually produce sustainable improvements." The vote was closer than Vivian would have preferred, but it represented validation that competence could be recognized and rewarded regardless of its source. That evening, Vivian met Tyrone and Jaden at a restaurant in Queens. The first time she'd traveled to their neighborhood, the first time she'd shared a meal with people whose lives had been shaped by economic limitations she'd never experienced. "Ms. Whitmore," Jaden said as they waited for their food, "Dad says you've been helping him use his smart person skills at work instead of just cleaning things." The 9-year-old's summary was accurate and touching, reflecting his understanding that his father possessed capabilities that hadn't been previously recognized or utilized. "Your father has been helping me understand things about leadership and business that I never learned in school or from other executives," Vivian replied. "Sometimes the most important teachers are people whose experiences are different from your own." As they shared dinner and conversation that ranged from Jaden's school projects to Tyrone's military service to Vivian's ongoing processing of her adoption, all three understood that their relationship had evolved beyond professional collaboration into something that resembled family. "Vivian," Tyrone said as they prepared to leave the restaurant, "I want you to know that working with you has reminded me that my skills have value beyond just supporting my family's immediate needs. For the first time since my military discharge, I feel like I'm contributing to something larger than just getting by. Tyrone, working with you has taught me that leadership means creating opportunities for people to contribute their best capabilities, not just managing people within the limitations I assume they have." As Vivian returned to her Manhattan apartment and Tyrone and Jaden headed home to Queens, all three carried the satisfaction of relationships that had grown through mutual respect, shared challenges, and the recognition that value existed in unexpected places. Some alliances they were discovering created not just professional success, but personal transformation that made everyone involved more capable and more generous than they'd been able to be alone. The question now was whether their individual growth and mutual support would be sufficient to survive the institutional resistance and social pressure that came with challenging established hierarchies about who deserved recognition and opportunity. 4 months after Tyrone's promotion, the alliance between him and Vivian faced its most serious threat from an unexpected source. Bradford Hutchins, a senior partner at Morrison & Associates who had been conducting hostile acquisition research on Whitmore Financial for 6 weeks without anyone's knowledge. "Ladies and gentlemen," Bradford announced to the emergency board meeting he'd called without Vivian's authorization, "I've uncovered information that suggests our CEO has been making decisions based on personal relationships rather than fiduciary responsibility to shareholders." The conference room was packed with board members, senior executives, and legal representatives who had been summoned with less than 12 hours' notice. Vivian sat at the head of the mahogany table, flanked by Tyrone and Angela Foster, facing accusations she hadn't been allowed to review in advance. Bradford distributed folders containing photographs, employment records, and financial analysis that painted Vivian's leadership decisions as emotional rather than strategic. "Ms. Whitmore has promoted a custodial worker to a senior consulting position, increased salaries for support staff without board approval, and implemented policy changes that prioritize employee satisfaction over profit maximization." The attack was comprehensive and well-researched, designed to portray Vivian as an unstable leader whose judgment had been compromised by personal circumstances rather than improved by broader perspective. "Furthermore," Bradford continued, "my investigation has revealed that Mr. Jackson's military discharge was related to psychological instability and that Ms. Whitmore's recent personnel decisions coincided with her discovery of personal family information that may have affected her emotional stability. The revelation about Vivian's adoption was delivered as evidence of compromised judgment rather than personal growth, while Tyrone's PTSD diagnosis was weaponized to suggest that both leaders were psychologically unfit for corporate responsibility." "Bradford," Vivian said, her voice controlled despite the fury building in her chest, "your information is both invasive and irrelevant to our discussion of company performance." "Company performance is exactly what we should be discussing," Bradford replied, producing quarterly reports that showed decreased profit margins despite improved operational efficiency. "Under your leadership, Whitmore Financial has prioritized expensive employee satisfaction initiatives over cost-cutting measures that would increase shareholder value." The criticism was technically accurate but strategically misleading. Profit margins had decreased partly because Vivian had chosen to invest in employee retention and training rather than maximizing short-term financial returns through workforce reduction. "Richard," Bradford addressed the board chairman directly, "the shareholders who appointed you expect leadership that prioritizes fiduciary responsibility over social experimentation. Ms. Whitmore's recent decisions suggest that her judgment has been compromised by personal relationships and emotional instability." Before Vivian could respond, Tyrone stood with the controlled authority he'd learned during military briefings under hostile conditions. "Mr. Hutchins, with respect, your analysis omits several relevant factors that affect both company performance and leadership evaluation. Mr. Jackson, you're not authorized to address this board meeting." "Actually, he is," Angela Foster interjected, consulting corporate bylaws she'd researched after learning about Bradford's surprise meeting. "Senior consultants have speaking rights during board discussions that affect their departmental responsibilities." Tyrone approached the presentation screen with documents he'd prepared for exactly this kind of attack. For the next 20 minutes, he systematically demolished Bradford's arguments by presenting comprehensive data about employee productivity, client satisfaction, and long-term financial projections that showed sustainable growth rather than short-term profit maximization. "Mr. Hutchins, Your analysis focuses on quarterly profit margins while ignoring factors that determine long-term competitive advantage, Tyrone explained, displaying charts that compared Whitmore Financial's performance to industry averages across multiple metrics. Employee retention has increased by 40%, reducing recruitment and training costs that typically consume 8 to 12% of operational budgets. Client satisfaction has improved by 35%, resulting in contract renewals and referrals that will generate revenue for years rather than quarters. The presentation was professional and compelling, but Bradford had prepared for technical challenges to his position. Mr. Jackson, regardless of short-term improvements, your employment history raises questions about reliability and judgment that shareholders deserve to consider when evaluating leadership decisions. The attack on Tyrone's military service and medical discharge was designed to trigger exactly the kind of psychological response that would validate Bradford's arguments about emotional instability affecting business judgment. But instead of defensive anger, Tyrone responded with calm professionalism that demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership capability Bradford was trying to discredit. Mr. Hutchins, my military service included security operations that required decision-making under extreme stress, risk assessment in volatile environments, and personnel management during crisis conditions. My medical discharge resulted from physical injuries sustained during combat operations, not psychological instability that would affect professional judgment. Tyrone paused, making eye contact with board members who were evaluating his credibility in real time. More importantly, the question isn't whether my background meets traditional expectations for corporate consulting positions. The question is whether my contributions have improved company performance in measurable ways that benefit shareholders. The distinction was crucial and strategic, redirecting attention from personal qualifications to professional results that could be objectively evaluated. Furthermore, Vivian added, standing to address the board with confidence that came from months of personal growth and professional success, Mr. Hutchins' analysis deliberately omits information about his own motivations for attacking our leadership team. Vivian produced documents that Angela had helped her research during the sleepless night following Bradford's surprise meeting announcement. Mr. Hutchins represents Morrison and Associates, which has been attempting to acquire Whitmore Financial for 8 months. His attack on our leadership team serves his clients' interests in destabilizing our company to facilitate hostile acquisition at below-market valuation. The revelation shifted the entire dynamic of the meeting. Bradford's criticism wasn't disinterested analysis of corporate performance. It was strategic undermining designed to benefit competitors who would profit from Whitmore Financial's institutional vulnerability. Additionally, Angela Foster contributed, Mr. Hutchins's investigation into Ms. Whitmore's personal adoption records and Mr. Jackson's medical history represents potentially illegal invasion of privacy that could expose our board to liability if we act on improperly obtained information. The legal implications were significant enough to concern board members who understood that discrimination based on adoption status or military service disabilities could result in federal lawsuits that would cost far more than any short-term profit margins. The confrontation continued for 3 hours, with Bradford systematically attacking every aspect of Vivian's leadership, while Tyrone and Angela defended both her decision-making and their own professional contributions. But the turning point came when Jaden appeared in the conference room doorway, escorted by building security, who hadn't known how to handle a 9-year-old asking to speak with his father during a business meeting. "Dad," Jaden said with the serious expression he used for important family communications, "I know you're in a meeting, but I wanted to give you this before your presentation." Jaden handed Tyrone a folded paper that turned out to be a hand-drawn chart showing Whitmore Financial's improved employee satisfaction scores, alongside a note that read, Dad, you're helping people feel valued at work, just like you make me feel valued at home. That's the most important job anyone can have." The moment was both innocent and profound, demonstrating the human impact of leadership decisions that prioritize dignity and opportunity over purely financial metrics. "Mr. Hutchins," Vivian said after Jaden left, "this is what leadership actually looks like. Not maximizing profit by treating employees as expendable resources, but creating organizational cultures where people can contribute their best capabilities while supporting their families with dignity." The board vote that followed was closer than Vivian would have preferred, but it represented validation that growth, innovation, and human development were legitimate corporate priorities rather than emotional indulgences that compromised fiduciary responsibility. Bradford's acquisition attempt was defeated, but the institutional resistance to Vivian's leadership style had been clearly established. Some board members would continue questioning decisions that prioritized long-term sustainability over short-term profit maximization. As the meeting concluded and executives filed out, Tyrone remained behind with Vivian to process the emotional and professional implications of surviving their most serious institutional challenge. "Vivian, I'm sorry that my employment created vulnerabilities that people could use to attack your leadership. Tyrone, your employment created opportunities for both of us to become better leaders and better people. The attacks we face today came from people who profit from systems that waste human potential." As they prepared to leave the office and return to their respective homes, Vivian to her Manhattan apartment, Tyrone to his Queens neighborhood where Jaden was waiting with homework and questions about the meeting, both understood that their alliance had survived its most serious test. Some confrontations, they realized, were less about winning or losing than about demonstrating that relationships based on mutual respect and shared values could withstand institutional pressure designed to force conformity to traditional hierarchies. 22 months after Tyrone had opened the safe that changed both their lives, Vivian stood in the playground of Jaden's elementary school in Queens, watching her 11-year-old unofficial stepson demonstrate the rocket he'd built for the science fair. The suburban setting was dramatically different from the Manhattan boardrooms where she'd spent most of her adult life, but it felt more like home than any environment she'd previously known. "Ms. Vivian," Jaden called, his voice carrying the comfortable familiarity of a child who had gradually accepted an adult into his family circle. "Come see how the propulsion system works. Dad helped me calculate the fuel ratios, but I designed the stabilization fins myself." Vivian approached the display table with genuine interest, recognizing how much Jaden had grown since that first meeting in her office. At 11, he moved with quiet confidence and spoke about complex subjects with the analytical precision he'd inherited from Tyrone, but without the cautious defensiveness that had characterized his father's interactions with authority figures. "This is remarkable engineering, Jaden. Have you considered aerospace as a career path?" "Maybe. But I also want to understand business and leadership like you and Dad do. I think solving problems requires both technical skills and people skills." The observation reflected wisdom beyond his years, shaped by watching his father and Vivian navigate professional challenges that required both analytical competence and emotional intelligence. Tyrone approached from the parking area, walking with the slight limp that remained from his military injuries, but moving with confidence that came from 2 years of meaningful work that utilized his capabilities rather than hiding them. At 44, he carried himself with the authority of someone whose expertise was recognized and respected. "How's our rocket scientist doing?" Tyrone asked, embracing Vivian with the natural affection that had developed gradually over months of shared challenges and mutual support. "He's explaining propulsion theory to parents who think science fair projects should involve baking soda volcanoes." Vivian replied with amusement that reflected her ongoing education about middle-class family dynamics she'd never previously encountered. Their relationship had evolved slowly and deliberately, shaped by both of their caution about relationships that could affect Jaden's stability. What began as professional collaboration had deepened into personal partnership built on shared values rather than romantic fantasy or economic convenience. "Vivian," Tyrone said quietly, "the Hendersons are staring again. Are you comfortable with the attention our relationship generates in this neighborhood?" The question reflected ongoing social dynamics that accompanied their interracial relationship and dramatic economic differences. Some of Jaden's classmates' parents remained curious about the wealthy white CEO who had become involved with their neighborhood's single father, particularly given the unconventional way their relationship had developed. "Tyrone, I'm more comfortable here than I've ever been anywhere else. If some people need time to adjust to relationships that don't match their expectations, that's their limitation, not our problem." The confidence in Vivian's response reflected 2 years of personal growth that had taught her to value authentic connection over social approval. Her relationship with Tyrone and Jaden had provided emotional fulfillment she'd never found in corporate achievement or inherited wealth. "Besides," Vivian continued, "Jaden handles curious questions about our family structure with more grace than most adults manage in boardroom negotiations." The observation was accurate. Jaden had developed sophisticated responses to classmates and adults who asked about his unusual family situation, explaining that families were created through choice and commitment rather than just traditional structures. "Dad, Ms. Vivian," Jaden said, returning from his conversation with science fair judges, "I won second place in the engineering category, and Mrs. Patterson says there might be a summer program for students interested in advanced science projects." The academic recognition was significant but not surprising. Under Tyrone and Vivian's combined influence, Jaden had flourished academically and socially, developing confidence that came from stable family support and high expectations. "Jaden, that's wonderful," Vivian said, genuinely proud of achievements that reflected the boys' natural intelligence and the educational opportunities their family resources could provide. "Tell us about the summer program." As Jaden explained the advanced science curriculum, Vivian reflected on how dramatically her priorities had changed since discovering her adoption and meeting Tyrone. Corporate success still mattered, but it served family well-being rather than defining her personal worth. Whitmore Financial had continued thriving under her leadership, partly because her management style had become more collaborative and employee-focused. The company consistently ranked among the best places to work in financial services, and employee retention had reached industry-leading levels. More importantly, Vivian had learned to measure success through relationships and personal growth, rather than just professional achievement and social status. Her friendship with Angela Foster had deepened into genuine sisterhood, while her working relationship with Tyrone had evolved into partnership that enhanced both their capabilities. "Vivian," Tyrone said as they walked toward the parking area after the science fair concluded, "there's something I want to discuss with you and Jaden." The serious tone made both Vivian and Jaden immediately attentive to whatever announcement Tyrone was preparing to make. "I've been thinking about our living situation, about how much time we spend commuting between Manhattan and Queens, about whether our current arrangement serves everyone's needs as well as it could." Vivian felt her heart rate accelerate, uncertain whether Tyrone was suggesting they move in together or reconsidering their relationship entirely. "What kind of changes are you thinking about?" Vivian asked carefully. "I'm thinking about whether we should find a place that works for all three of us, somewhere between your work and Jaden's school, somewhere that feels like home for our family rather than two separate households that we travel between." The suggestion represented a level of commitment that none of them had explicitly discussed, but that had been implicit in their daily interactions for months. "Dad," Jaden said with 11-year-old directness. "Are you asking Ms. Vivian to move in with us, or are you asking if we can all live together somewhere new? I'm asking whether we want to make our family official in ways that reflect how we actually live and care for each other." Vivian felt tears that surprised her with their intensity. Over the past 2 years, she'd discovered what family actually meant. Not just genetic connection or legal obligation, but daily choice to support each other's growth and well-being. "Tyrone, Jaden, I would love to build a home with both of you, but I want to make sure we're making this decision for the right reasons, and that we're prepared for the challenges that come with blending our different backgrounds and expectations." The conversation continued during dinner at their favorite Queen's restaurant, with all three of them discussing practical considerations about housing, schools, work commutes, and the social dynamics of their unconventional family structure. "Ms. Vivian," Jaden said as they shared dessert, "can I ask you something personal? Always. Do you think you would have wanted to be part of our family if you hadn't found out about being adopted? If you hadn't needed Dad's help with understanding those documents?" The question was perceptive and painful, forcing Vivian to consider whether her relationship with Tyrone and Jaden was based on genuine connection or emotional need created by her identity crisis. "Jaden, I think I would have needed to become a different person to appreciate what your father had to offer. The person I was 2 years ago wasn't capable of recognizing value that didn't match my expectations about education, social status, and professional achievement." She paused, considering how to explain complex psychological changes to an 11-year-old. "But I also think that good people find each other eventually, even if it takes difficult circumstances to help them recognize what they've been missing." 6 months later, Vivian stood in the kitchen of their new home in Brooklyn, helping Jaden prepare for his first day at a new school, while Tyrone reviewed security protocols for a consulting project that would take him to Boston for 3 days. Their house was smaller than Vivian's previous Manhattan apartment, but larger than Tyrone's Queen's rental, designed to accommodate family life rather than impressive entertaining. The refrigerator was covered with Jaden's artwork, academic achievements, and family photographs that documented their gradual transformation from unlikely allies to genuine family. "Vivian," Tyrone said, reviewing his travel itinerary, "are you comfortable managing everything here while I'm in Boston? Jaden has his school orientation, and you have the board meeting about the quarterly performance review." "We'll be fine," Vivian replied, meaning it. "Jaden and I have established our own routines for when you're traveling, and Angela will help with any work emergencies that require immediate attention." As Tyrone prepared to leave for the airport and Jaden gathered his school supplies, Vivian realized that their family had become something none of them could have imagined when she'd made that cruel bet about opening the safe. They had created stability without sacrificing growth, intimacy without losing individual identity, and success that served human flourishing rather than just professional achievement. "Dad," Jaden said, hugging Tyrone goodbye, "bring me something interesting from Boston, but not something expensive. I like presents that show you were thinking about me, not presents that show how much money we have." Today, the distinction reflected values all three of them had learned through building relationships based on attention and care, rather than material demonstration or social obligation. As Vivian and Jaden waved goodbye from their front porch, both understood that their family had been created through choice, commitment, and daily decisions to support each other's best possibilities. Some discoveries, Vivian realized, opened doors to lives that were richer and more meaningful than anything that could be measured by traditional success metrics. The safe had contained documents about identity, but opening it had revealed truths about love, partnership, and the families people create when they choose to see each other clearly and respond with generosity. The end. This story reminds us that our most valuable qualities are often hidden beneath assumptions others make about our circumstances, and that the courage to reveal our authentic capabilities can transform not only our own lives, but the lives of everyone we encounter. In a world that frequently judges worth by job titles and social status, Tyrone and Vivian's journey shows us that genuine partnership requires seeing people's potential rather than their current limitations. Sometimes the most meaningful relationships are built not through shared backgrounds or similar experiences, but through mutual respect and the willingness to support each other's growth, even when that growth challenges our own assumptions about success and value. What abilities are you keeping hidden because they don't match others' expectations? What relationships could you build if you looked past surface circumstances to recognize the competence and character that might be waiting for acknowledgement? Like and subscribe for more stories that celebrate the power of recognizing talent in unexpected places, the importance of building relationships on respect rather than assumptions, and the truth that the strongest families are often created through choice rather than circumstance.